Hi, everyone. We are in chapter 9 of the Gospel of Mark. We are in the middle of our December devotional called Messiah. This is a chapter that has a lot of um, a lot of content in it, and Mark goes through it rather quickly. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the Transfiguration. um, this was a big this was a big deal. So we talked in the other chapter about how Peter finally got it, and he was all excited. He recognized Jesus as the Messiah, and he's just like, this is great. I finally get it. We've seen you do all these miracles, and now we know. And they have all this like adrenaline. But then Jesus tells them, what's going to happen, that he's going to be betrayed and that he's going to die. And and Peter didn't want to hear that, right? And so Jesus rebuked him and said, Satan, get behind me. That was in the last chapter. So now this is like 6 days after that. Okay. And we see that this big scene is the transfiguration. And if you can imagine, um, this was a pretty big deal. In fact, Peter never forgot this through his whole life. Like he never forgot it. I don't think any of the disciples, that witnessed this phenomenon, um, ever forgot it. It stayed with them forever. So it's quite significant. And why is it significant? Well, the transfiguration, really showed, maybe for the first time, that Jesus, that he was like God, and because he's dazzling, right? They see him up there on the mountain, they're looking up, and it really showed the disciples an outward expression of the Lord's inner nature. He's dazzling, he was bright white. Um, he was glowing, and his deity is shining forth from within, and it shows his Jesus's sinless nature. And then also significant that Moses and Elijah are there on top of the mountain with Jesus, and it says that they were talking in Mark's gospel, right? That they were speaking. Um, but in Luke's gospel, it goes into more detail, obviously, um, and says that they were speaking about Jesus's exodus from Jerusalem. So basically, they were talking about, what was coming up, and Jesus, exiting the world, through the crucifixion. Um, and you're not going to get that from Mark, but you will get the details over in Luke. So that was pretty significant, in that they were speaking together. And why Moses? Why Elijah? All right. Well, if you go into the Old Testament, for the Jewish people, Moses symbolized law, and Elisha symbolized prophecy. So, that's why this is sort of significant. Not that the Romans, because remember, Mark is writing this for Roman Gentiles, and the Romans, they really, this part didn't mean really didn't mean what it would mean to a different audience here. But the disciples, though, that were watching this, they were Jewish, and they were very, very, very familiar with Old Testament prophecy. Um, so that's why that part is significant, and I think that's why it was Elijah and Moses. Now you also see this dramatic scene, and this is dramatic, where the cloud comes and rebukes Peter because Peter, he didn't know what to say, right? And Peter, just being his human nature, had to say something. He couldn't just be silent and they couldn't just observe. Peter had to open his mouth. So, a lesson that sometimes it's better just to keep your mouth shut. Especially, in those times where you have fear or you're anxious and you kind of don't know what to say, just don't say anything because he misspeaks here. And uh, it's it doesn't go good for Peter because Peter brings this cloud. He brings the cloud in, and I'm going to read it because you know it's there's a lot of drama here, so I want to read it. Um, I'm going to pick it up in Mark chapter 9, verse um, 5. Peter responded and said to Jesus, Rabbi, Master, is it good for us to be here? Let us make 3 sacred tents, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. For he did not really know what to say because they were terrified and stunned by the miraculous sight. Then a cloud formed overshadowing them, and a voice came out of the cloud. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him and obey him. Suddenly they looked around and no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus alone. Okay, so yeah, this cloud, and the cloud comes over, and this voice, this dramatic, strong voice, um, rebukes him and says, Listen to him. He is my beloved Son. Listen to him. And why did Peter get rebuked? Well, he got rebuked for a couple of reasons, 3 reasons actually. Um, Going back to the previous chapter when Peter actually rebuked Jesus, right? So you don't do that, right? And so the Lord, the Almighty Father, is like, you don't do that. You don't tell my son he's wrong because listen to him. He's the truth. And so that was sort of for Peter. And then Peter makes this assumption that they're going to stay, that Moses and Elijah are going to stay with them. So, he kind of like, you're missing it. Like, no, they're not going to stay. And why would you think that they're going to stay? And then, really, this third reason is because he goes on to say, I'm going to make this sacred place for you 3. Well, let's get these tents for Moses and Elijah and for you, Jesus. And um, he's putting them like on these equal playing field, like equal tabernacles. And that was not the case. Like, Jesus was set apart, even though Moses and Elijah are great, you know, prophets and fathers, like of the faith. Like, they're great men, right? But they were men. Jesus is so much more. Like, don't put, recognize that this man Jesus who's with you is my son. This is greatness. Listen to him. And so I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to get rebuked by a dark cloud. So that was a really big deal. And like I said, Peter never he never forgot this. And I think if you and I were watching, we would I don't think we would forget it either, you know. And I guess just remember the greatness of our Creator. Um, and I think going back to, like, when I see a beautiful sunrise or sunset, or when I see something beautiful, I automatically, um, give praise to God for that because He is great and we see beautiful We get to see beautiful nature all around us, and that's his creation. And he doesn't, we don't get rebuked from the clouds, but we get to delight in the love of these beautiful sunsets he gives us with the clouds. And it's really beautiful. So that's why you'll see me talk a lot about our Creator when I see those really beautiful, phenomenal things. All right, so that's the Transfiguration. Please read it. I only read a section of it, but there's also, when they're coming back from that, from the Transfiguration, the disciples, there's some like commotion, right, as they're coming into town, and they're like, what is going on? Well, there was a child that, needed to have this unclean spirit come out, and the disciples couldn't do it. And so the man says, Jesus comes and says, what's going on? And so they're having this dialogue with each other. And in verse 23, um, uh, well, actually, let's go up to verse 21. So Jesus is like, what's going on? What's happening here? And so Jesus is asking him questions like like a doctor asks you when you come into the emergency room, what's going on, and how long has he been like this? So verse 21, how long has this been happening? Jesus asked the boy's father. He replied, since he was a little boy, the spirit often throws him into the fire or into the water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can. And then in verse 23, Jesus says, what do you mean if I can? Jesus asked, anything is possible if a person believes. And so I really want to spend some time talking about this. And it's really a question that I have for you out of this devotion today. So, how often do we accuse God of inability when the trouble really is our lack of faith? Because, like, do you minimize the greatness of God by first needing yourself to weigh the possibilities, um, if He can actually do it? Like, if the miracle is actually um, possible? Like, can you? If He can? So I want to know, like, what's that been like for you? Do you actually have faith um, that God can do it? And we see this, a lot in the Bible, in the Old Testament. This big, God performed this big miracle, the Exodus, right? For like his people, he took them out of Egypt, out of slavery, through the Red Sea. Now imagine that. And then they just forget. Or when Joshua is crossing the Jordan to get to the promised land, um then they suddenly, you forget, and the Lord's like, put 12 stones so that you remember this miracle. Well, they they forget. We forget the power sometimes that the Father Almighty has, and we think, oh, that's not possible for God to answer that prayer. And this is just a reminder, and He speaks it in the scriptures. It's the truth. It doesn't get any more clearer than verse 23. Anything is possible for those that believe. And so I want you to remember that. And if you have a tendency to, put our Lord in a box and think that you know what miracles He can do, don't do that. Because don't, don't send the cloud over you for rebuking, because uh, our God is big. Okay. And then I want to go on to later on in the chapter, verse 38, um, where the disciples are together and they tell Jesus, they tell Jesus, we saw this man, and he's casting out demons in your name. And we told him not to do that. And so this we see, I'm going to tell you what this is. This is jealousy. Okay. So the disciples were jealous. They saw someone else doing what that only they do. And so they thought, oh, well, we're the 12, we're the only ones that can do this. And they sort of had this way about them, that they were the in crowd, like they were the popular people. And this other person, who is this other person doing what we do, and they told him, don't do that. And so where you responded on, were you like the way Jesus responded, were you surprised what he told them, and this is Jesus teaching us, tolerance, that you don't have to be part of the special crowd. Okay. In the church, if you're not, some churches have titles, I don't know, deacon, we don't have them in my church, but but let's say, okay, so you're not a ministry leader. Okay. And so in my church we have ministry leaders. Okay, so you're not maybe a ministry leader. It doesn't mean that you can't do good works of Jesus. And in the beginning, like, I always maybe downsize and say, I can't pray, in a group because I'm not good enough, or, um, there's other people that are more important than me. They do it better. They've been Christians longer, or I haven't gone to Bible school, so I can't really talk to these. Even today, like, how can I talk to the Gospel of Mark? Um, I don't have any credentials, so the world would say I'm not worthy um, to speak to you in this gospel. And that's not true, because um, everyone that is speaking Jesus, that is teaching you from the Bible, not from their religion, but from the Bible, um, is doing works for the kingdom in their own way. And like, my way might not be the same as your way or someone else's way, because I'm still learning, and I'm still growing, and I'm still learning things. So maybe if I talk about a scripture one way, maybe will you think about it a different way. It doesn't make it bad. It doesn't make me a bad person. And in the eyes of the kingdom, it's still a blessing, because we're trying to promote Jesus and build people's relationships with our Lord. And that is not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And just because I might not be, highly decorated or highly certified, doesn't mean I'm any less than. And so basically, Jesus is responding to them, showing that, he's not the 12, but don't forbid him to do the work of me, of Jesus. Every follower of Jesus is to witness and to work for the kingdom. And like I said, our methods may be different, but in the end of the day, if we are truly doing the work of Jesus, then we are a blessing. So that's what I really want you to read that, and see if you can see that jealousy, the jealousy that they have, that the disciples have, um, because it applies today. Jealousy is a real emotion that applies today. Um, and then before that, I think in verse 33, I just want to bring this up a little bit, because they were answer. So the disciples were arguing amongst themselves, like, who is the greatest, and Jesus set them down, and they and basically he's telling them that serving the kingdom and God comes first. Does it mean that we can't be, we can't be ambitious in our life? Um, but let's look at our motives for why we're doing something, um, and let's compare that to Christ. Let's compare our motives to kingdom principles. And it's okay to be ambitious, but obeying God and serving people always comes first. So we have to just kind of take pause and say, okay, well, why am I doing this? And is it for my own worldly ambition? Is it for myself? Or is it for God's glory? Um, and think about, how could I be blessing someone else? So if you've thought about it and you're like, okay, I've been pretty self-motivated lately, just do one thing, right? So like, how can I do something to bless somebody else? I have to tell you that last week someone did this for me, and I was just not I was not I never expected this. I came home from work and there was a bag on my door, and there was a gift in there. And it was a beautiful gift of a picture of me and my daughter. Someone had printed it out for me because it was a beautiful picture. And they put it in a frame and they put it on my door. And that kindness was, you know, that was pretty amazing. And, I'm not going to forget that. I'm not going to forget that kindness. And it's just little things like that, little things that you can do. And it's not that, we can still go out and pursue our ambitions, but just if it's not balanced, if that's all you're doing is working for yourself, and if you're not giving very much, um, maybe take a look and see how you can do that different. You know, a little act of kindness goes a long way, for kingdom work, a long way for kingdom work. So the salt, you know, Jesus goes in and gives them to, in this chapter, if your eye is causing you to get away from kingdom principles, cut out your eye. In the same, cut off your arm. If your arm's causing you um, to stumble, then cut off your arm. If your foot is causing you to stumble, cut off your foot. So this is the kind of the same thing. Just stay grounded in kingdom work, stay grounded in reading your word, in doing these acts of kindness. And then, there's always room to improve. Or if you find yourself going off track, just get back on track. Like, it's never hopeless. You can always turn it around. And that's what Jesus does, gives us hope. So please read all of chapter 9. You're going to love it. And we'll see you back tomorrow for chapter 10.